For many North American gamers, including myself, the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 generations were the golden era of gaming thanks to the amount of experimentation and, most importantly, software from a bevy of developers and publishers that warranted any interested gamer in giving their product a chance. Atlas was no different, providing interesting role-playing games featuring mature, adult-oriented themes seen through the eyes of teenagers rooted in the traditions of standard turn-based RPGs. My first trying out of the Persona series came in 2001 when I rented Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Unfortunately, the offering was a little too much for my young mind to handle, and the game's greatness really went over my head. That problem faded away with each iteration in the series that I played. Not since 2009 have I fully experienced a Persona game due to the lack of owning a PS Vita or a PS TV. So coming into Persona 5 almost felt like a reintroduction to the franchise that really stood out in a once crowded genre for a variety of reasons that hopefully would become one of the most exciting games released in North America in 2017. It's pretty much impossible to complete everything in a first playthrough of a Persona game, and I came into my first playthrough with that knowledge, going out of my way to complete as many things as possible before the final dungeon. Upon saving my clear data specifically made for New Game Plus, I had put in 113 hours into my first playthrough of Persona 5. Rather than let the game sit for a while and come back to it in the future, I almost immediately started my New Game Plus playthrough with the intent of finishing off the trophies that I didn't attain, such as maxing out all the relationships or reading every book with my overpowered characters due to the ability to carry over all of the equipment the player purchased. I fully expect to get another 30 to 50 hours out of Persona 5, not to mention reloading some of those saves before some important decisions to see the various endings I didn't attain when trying to get the game's best conclusion. After being released in the fall of 2016 in its home country to high praise, anticipation for the worldwide release of Persona 5 grew steadily, thanks to the copious amounts of positive feedback it was getting from journalists and gamers alike. Atlas stuck to the franchise's usual formula of placing the player in control of a mostly voiceless, nameable protagonist. Though the character can be named anything the player wants, he is known throughout the majority of the game by his codename, Joker. Why Joker? Because he's the trickster, an individual able to steal the hearts of people and change the world. Essentially, that is the basis of Persona 5's story, as an expanding group of teenagers dipping into the pool of prototypical anime archetypes, including the student council president, oblivious to the way her peers conduct themselves outside of school, a half-Japanese teen model whose exotic features in comparison to her classmates and teachers have garnered her negative attention, and even a talking cat make up the cast. Beyond the absurdity and stereotypical nature of these youngsters lies the real essence of the story. The land of Japan has become corrupted by the desires of adults, using their money and power for their own benefit. There's really nothing unique about Persona 5's story if someone has played the previous games in the franchise, seen various anime with the same type of subject matter, or even read manga that has influenced many a memorable TV show and movie. The storytelling is where Persona 5 shines, thanks to its tackling of some thought-provoking themes, including rape, suicide, child abuse, and atonement. Thankfully, the game doesn't get too preachy, scurrying to the next point through the eyes of its understandably extremist protagonist, and moving the story along in hopes of finding the essence of true evil. And of course, to change the hearts of these dastardly individuals, the main characters must fight throughout a variety of dungeons called palaces. Unlike the randomly generated dungeons of Persona 4, the palaces of Persona 5 are grandiose depictions of the inner desires of the protagonist's targets, including everything from an expected castle to a spaceship that allows the player to literally take the characters through the dark unknown. There is a randomly generated dungeon, Mementos, that proves to be the game's grinding area, as well as the region where the player can partake in some of the game's side missions, but it pales in comparison to the actual palaces that all leave a lasting impression, thanks to the mixture of tough enemies, puzzles, and main villains giving grandiose speeches that someone would only get away with by living inside a fictionalized world. The battle system itself is rooted in the turn-based formula. The player can control up to 4 characters at a time, mixing physical strikes, spells, and shooting. The interesting twist when it comes to fighting the majority of the adversaries in Persona 5 is the fact that Joker can attain these monstrosities and utilize their various abilities in battle. With almost every enemy having some type of weakness, the player can knock down an enemy or an enemy group to hold up the creatures and negotiate with these beasts, possibly convincing them to join the good guys' cause. Landing that critical hit to leave an enemy or persona debilitated temporarily can also produce monetary options, or the player can just unleash an all-out attack that could be the finishing blow that ends a battle in impressive fashion. Impressive fashion is a great way to describe the game's battle system thanks to the experimentation of crafting and literally cutting through personas that allows the player to mix and match monster allies for new or powered up abilities that could do anything from healing the entire party to dodging one-hit kill curse attacks. As the game progresses and the more personas the player attains, the more freeing the battle system becomes as one learns what is beneficial in the long run, while slaughtering copious amounts of adversaries in the process. Unfortunately, everything about the game's battle system isn't of the positive quality. There aren't randomly generated battles as enemies visibly move around on screen. To initiate a battle, the player must ambush an enemy or simply attack it face to face. Usually ambushing comes through means of stealth. A new implementation to the franchise that sees the player tapping one button near a wall or a perfectly placed chair to hide in plain sight. Sadly, the camera gets locked in a small rotation point that makes it hard to see where the enemy is depending on where the player hides. More times than I wanted, the main character would roll out of cover at the worst possible time so I could simply figure out my surroundings in relation to the enemy I wanted to slay. Also, Persona 5 looks to its PS2 entries as inspiration to one of the battle system's biggest gripes. If Joker gets knocked out in battle, it's game over. During boss battles, this really isn't that big of a problem because you can simply retry, but if some lowly scrubs somehow gang up and take out Joker before anyone can help him, the player will have to return to their last save point, meaning time, items, money, and experience loss, unless you're playing on safe mode difficulty. While the old school nature of these implementations is a reminder of just how tough JRPGs used to and still can be, early game deaths, because one simply can't be prepared for the onslaught to come, can become incredibly frustrating to the point of calling it a day. Tying into both the story and its battle system are the day-to-day activities the player will take part in, including hanging out with confidants. This game's version of social links from Persona 3 and 4. The main character will be allowed to meet up with his allies and potential allies alike, with the hope of building a relationship that will quickly affect combat thanks to abilities such as Baton Pass, where the main characters can high-five their way through battle after landing critical hits to keep the powered-up hits coming for brutal victories. Other abilities include everything from making it easier to attain personas, switching characters in the middle of battle, create HP and special point restorative items, and fully expose the randomized maps of mementos. The leveling of confidant links also affects the effectiveness of persona fusions. Higher the link, higher the level of the persona created if the persona has the same arcana of the confidant. Being a teenager, Joker must attend school, take part in class, and complete exams during the game's year-long journey. There are various other activities the player can partake in, including the burger eating challenge, playing video games, or reading books. These activities don't just pass the time, but also help Joker gain points that are added to one of the 5 social stats: kindness, charm, guts, knowledge, and perception. These social stats also play a role in how fast Joker can level up his confidant relationships. How many items Joker can craft at his workbench that'll give him the opportunity to create items like lockpicks to open up treasure chests in mementos and palaces. Every system introduced in Persona 5 ties into another effectively, and it's up to the player to see what works best for whatever the gamer has planned for one of those carefree days where Joker can just run around while ignoring the various requests from his confidants who are already maxed out. Stylistically, Persona 5 is pretty impressive as well. From a visual aspect, everything has a bright red snap to it, from the high-powered moves in battle to the menu screen that will see Joker's avatar pulling off different poses to correlate with each movement of the analog stick. The anime cutscenes created by Production IG actually work incredibly well when it comes to localized lip syncing, while looking as good as any anime series from a couple of years ago. From an audio perspective, the music in Persona 5 is unforgettable. While the track rotation is infrequent and rare, especially the battle theme Last Surprise, the fusion of rock, jazz, electro, and even a little rap is done exceptionally well. And for the first time in years, I couldn't get the music out of my head in the best way possible. Arguably the biggest flaw when it comes to Persona 5 is its long-winded nature. With the previous two numbered Persona games netting anywhere between 70 to 100 hours of a player's time on the first playthrough, Persona 5 follows in that tradition while tacking on an unnecessary amount of repetitive dialogue. Conversations between the main characters via texting usually boils down to many recaps of what they already talked about and voicing their worries about the current situation. The final third of the game saw me practically skimming through all the texting conversations. The story too suffers from going on a little too long, with one party member being introduced about 2/3 into the game that really isn't even necessary. Though some will say that in a landscape where there is not much to challenge it in terms of greatness, Persona 5 isn't worthy of the hype or praise it's garnered thus far. Those people shouldn't be taken seriously, as Persona 5 is a fantastic addition to any PS3 or PS4 owner's library. Even with its noticeable flaws, it's a true modern-day masterpiece. In a world where developers continuously say turn-based RPGs and JRPGs are a dying breed or just plain uninteresting, Persona 5 feels like a breath of fresh air while invoking a rush of nostalgia. For all the things Persona 5 does similar to its past contemporaries and even the franchise's prior offerings, the game somehow feels fresh, innovative, and crafted with the utmost of care to the point it stands out amongst the pack, unlike any other game in the genre in quite some time. Persona 5 isn't a perfect game due to its flaws, including a badly implemented stealth system, the long-winded nature of the game's dialogue, loading screens atop loading screens that are filled with useless information, and Morgana being so demanding about Joker going to sleep when he just wants to party. Beyond those problems stands a game full of heart, from plot and character perspectives, a battle system that keeps the player focused throughout, and one of the most enjoyable video game soundtracks in quite some time. Persona 5 is a must-play type of game for those longing for the golden era of JRPGs invading the West, or even those simply wanting to sink in a lot of time into a single, enjoyable experience. It will be difficult for any game released in 2017 to outdo Persona 5.
Looking cool, Joker!
Okay.